Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to check in on some great theories and findings and earth-shattering discoveries that you probably never heard of before, but if you had, they would change your whole life. And we've been doing a lot of Bible decodes. I think today is number 169, and we just recently got through this book, Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult, by Michael Menesgotz, Menesgotz. Probably the last 100 or more videos are on that topic. We're in this topic called the Reciprocal Church. That's the overall unit that we're doing. Today is, I believe, number 356, and that's basically to construct a parachute for you when your religion, your Western religion, crashes and burns, and you have to pick up the pieces and be light on your feet and be able to adjust and put together a spiritual practice of your own, because all five of the Western religions are in the process of crashing and burning. That includes Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Satanism, and scientism or atheism. All of them have been discredited, but we just haven't figured that out yet. So we've gone through more than 100 decodes on the New Testament to really show what's going on there, and that it was of Flavian origin, meaning that the New Testament was written by the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty. And that is kind of the theme that we've been going on, and it's a very, to me, very obvious psychological operation coming from the Romans against the Jews that they just got done fighting in a war, and they backdated the story of Jesus. They proposed the story of a Jewish savior. They knew that the Jews were waiting for a Messiah, but the Messiah they were waiting for was a military leader who would help them overthrow the Romans, kick out the Romans from Judea. And a couple of Jewish candidates for Messiahhood actually did that in 66 AD. And the two primary military generals for the Romans, Vespasian and Titus, eventually became the two first emperors of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. They were both wounded in the war, and they were both the generals, made generals in this war. And so to kind of pacify or neutralize or domesticate or tame the Jews, they proposed a Jewish Messiah, a Roman version of a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack and turning the other cheek to oppression. And at the same time that they wrote the Gospels, the Romans also wrote a history of the war against the Jews called War of the Jews, written by Josephus, who is a pen name, or possibly a real person, but most likely a pen name of a member of the Roman royal family, at least by adoption, a person who lived at Caesar's palace in a townhouse and was employed as one of the court historians for the Caesars. We know that Josephus wrote War of the Jews, or what we do know is that War of the Jews emanated from Rome. But if you read War of the Jews and don't just cite Josephus as the person who corroborates the existence of Jesus, but if you actually open the books and look at what it says, the writings of Josephus are very strong evidence against the existence of Jesus, because they are an echo or a mirror of the Gospels. They were clearly written by the same entity. Whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the Gospels. The amount of parallels between the two are absurd, and really mocking and ridiculing you if you actually believe them. One particular example of the parallels has to do with the parallel sojourns of both Jesus and Emperor Titus, or General Titus, in Judea. Jesus' ministry goes from 30 to 33 AD, and Titus is there from 70 to 73 AD. Every place that Titus goes in War of the Jews to fight in his military campaign, Jesus also goes in the same order, and every place that they go, they encounter parallel events. The story of Jesus is modeled after the military campaign of Titus. Among other things, there are way more parallels than that, but we're talking about 40 events right there that are in the same order, going from location to location, and are offset by exactly 40 years. Then many of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are literally fulfilled in the pages of War of the Jews, most of them by Titus. That also sets up the poison pill that Titus is the second coming of Jesus. And Michael Menescott makes a lot out of that, and really says that this Christianity was part of a Flavian secrecy cult, meaning that there are levels of initiation. First, you start out thinking that Jesus is a hero, or a Jewish hero. Then you're thinking that Jesus is the Messiah, and then you recognize that actually Titus is ahead of Jesus, because Titus is actually the second coming of Jesus. And then finally, it's revealed to you that the story of Jesus is a fiction, and that you are now converted to what he calls pure emperor worship. Another motive, I think, for the Romans was that Titus, so that Titus could get the Jews to worship him, even unknowingly, because the Jews were so zealous about their religion that they would, many of them would rather die than to bow down to Titus or any of the other Roman Caesars. But anyway, once you recognize the code of the New Testament and how it works in tandem with War of the Jews, you recognize that the Romans are mocking you if you believe in the New Testament. They are ridiculing you. Joseph Atwill called it the world's first intelligence test. And if you fail the intelligence test, what happens is that you believe in a false God, because it was created by the Romans as a psychological operation. People these days are starting to understand psychological operations. They can understand maybe the Kennedy assassination or the 9/11 situation, or even some that are more recent. They might understand the Federal Reserve. These are all like psychological operations on the people. But it goes back way, way, way further. The Romans were masters of propaganda. And they had created a number of other religions at this same time. Titus created at least 2 other religions, and Vespasian created at least 1 other. So this is right down the alley of what the Romans would do, and they had a massive motive for doing so, to mellow out the Jews. The Gospels are also written in Greek, which is the language of the common people in Rome, not so much in Judea. And the Romans had a monopoly on publishing, on censorship, and on distribution. The Romans were the only people who even could have done it. Finally, Michael Menescot's looks for parallels between the book of Luke and War of the Jews, and he found over 250 of them just in the book of Luke. It's over 10 per chapter, meaning that the parallels are thoroughly saturating the pages of Luke. We're going to go over that one chapter at a time coming up here soon, possibly even live. And not only that, but Menescot's put the all of the parallels on a chart. Put the book of Luke on the vertical axis, War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. He plotted a point for every parallel event or parallel passage between the two books, and discovered that he had formed 5 near perfect letters in Latin, the language of the Roman Caesars. APTVS, Titus Vespasian, and AP could mean the Holy Spirit, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Aegion Pneuma, or possibly Arius Piso, who was a shadow operator within the Flavian dynasty and a close relative of Titus and Vespasian. But anyway, the main point is not only did the Romans write the New Testament, but they're mocking you because they signed their names to it. And you still can't figure it out. Or not just you, we all have not been able to figure it out. Although many people throughout history have figured it out, including the person who wrote as William Shakespeare. All of Shakespeare's plays are about the fact that the Romans wrote the New Testament. But they are written from a Jewish perspective, and it's basically a psyop counterattack to the psyop attack that the Romans made on the Jews. Shakespeare's attack is an attack from the Jews against the Gentiles, because Shakespeare was this woman named Amelia Bassano, who was a Sephardic Jew from Italy. And Joseph Atwill gets into all of that in his book Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. He also authored Caesar's Messiah and showed us that Flavian signature parallels between Titus and Jesus, among many, many, many other parallels. But we're kind of all done with that. We're going to, but I'm not quite ready to do the Luke rollout, to roll out the book of Luke. I also want to roll out some of the other New Testament works, especially Revelation. And eventually we will also get into the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is every bit as suspect as the New Testament is, but for entirely different reasons. And, well, somewhat similar, maybe, reasons. What we're going to do, this is, so this is kind of an interlude where we're kind of laying down what's going to happen, and, just kind of giving you a warning or a preparation. So hopefully it's like after 3 in the morning right now, and I've spent the whole evening going over thousands of pages of my notes, looking for my notes for this book, and I finally found it just a few minutes ago. But I haven't really had time to go over the notes to present what I'd like to present, which is to be going over especially this book by Lee Strobel called The Case for Christ. This is the book that a Christian apologist will give to you to try to convert you to Jesus. It's probably the most popular book that a Christian apologist or a Christian will give you to try to convert you. And Strobel is an author a writer for the Chicago Tribune, I believe. I don't know if he's still alive. This book goes back 25 years or something. But, and that's why he writes The Case for Christ. He's trying to present a legal case for Christ to exist. But and so he goes all over the country interviewing various experts, scholarly experts, about various aspects of Jesus' life that maybe you think are problematic, and these apologists eventually convince you that, oh well, Occam's razor, we wouldn't ever just say that this has a supernatural origin if there was a human explanation for it. If there was a rational and reasonable human explanation for this, we would use it, but there isn't, and so God did it. That's kind of what a lot of the arguments are. And the problem is that none of these people know, or pretend that they don't know, that the Romans did it. And so what we're going to be kind of going over is Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. But the case for Christ is even a better case for Caesar. Most of the arguments that are made in the case for Christ actually point even more to Caesar, that Caesar did it, or that the Romans did it, as opposed to God did it. And so we're going to look at that, and we might go over a few of the notes from another kind of book that looks critically at the history. Now, this isn't really so much from a Roman perspective, like that the Romans did it, but it just looks at a lot of the red flags and the holes in the Christian story. I think it's kind of damaging as well. I'm not out here set out to damage Christianity. I'm just trying to relate what I consider to be the truth based on evidence. And if somebody, a lot of this stuff has been uncovered by me because I tried to become a Christian. I read the Bible. I tried to, harmonize with what it said. But as I read it, I started with the New Testament, and then I read the Old Testament, and then I read the New Testament again. And almost all the way through, I'm like, do you really expect me to believe this? This is not only that, but I've also, especially in the Old Testament, it's like I've read these stories before in my earlier reading. I've read the Sumerian stuff, or at least the translation of a couple translations of it. I've read, ancient Egyptian mythology. I've read a lot of Greek mythology. This is all stuff it's not even original stuff. And I think that's what I was saying yesterday, is what's very offensive about the New Testament, the Old Testament to me, is that especially Genesis, the first part of Genesis up until Noah's Ark, and maybe even past that, it's borrowed 100% completely from the Sumerian story. The Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel, the flood, all of these things are in the Sumerian story, and they the Sumerian story gives 5 times more detail to the story. The Jewish version is just a kind of a cliff notes of the Sumerian version, and not only the Sumerians, but all of their descendants in the Near East. You know, the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and you know, dozens of other groups of people that probably nobody's heard of, or few people have heard of. But Jewish and Christian scholars dismiss the Sumerian stories as mythology, but the story that's derivative from it, the one in the Old Testament, is seen as being historical. So they plagiarized it from the Sumerians and then dismissed the Sumerian story as being a myth, and credited the Jewish version as being true, as being historical. How ridiculous is that? But we won't get there until a little bit later. But what we're gonna get into, hopefully, if I'm able to take the time to go over my notes here, I'm going to try to present this case for Christ as the case for Caesar. And again, like I said, I won't say like I desperately tried to become a Christian, but I tried to read the New Testament and the Old Testament in a sympathetic way, to see, because there are a lot of Christians out there that I think they're good people, and they're red-pilled. They know about the government corruption. They know about the psychological operations, but somehow they don't apply that to, and they know how to be non-emotional in their judgment about things, except when it has to do with things like Christianity. And then it's kind of like a big blind spot for them. And so I try to be a sympathetic reader to this, but I just couldn't, because it's not believable and there isn't any evidence for it. I mean, there's no evidence. If Christians want to give me evidence, I will pay attention. But all the evidence that they ever give me is immediately dismissed by the Roman origins hypothesis. The Roman origins hypothesis that the Flavians wrote the New Testament, it explains just about everything. There's a couple of minor things that I'm not satisfied with the complaints. Why is Josephus written in a slightly different form of Greek than the New Testament? I mean, if that's, you know, if that's the best argument for it not to be real, that's not very good, because that's, you know, that's just basically like saying they were written in 2 dialects. You know, one is more of a working class dialect, and one is more of an elite dialect or something. And other than that, there isn't really that much that is problematic. Now, the other issue is the Dead Sea Scrolls. How do the Dead Sea Scrolls fit into all of this? And so we'll explore all of that, and eventually work our way to the Old Testament, and then eventually we're going to work our way to more of the parachute stuff, the stuff that you can build your own spiritual practice, build your own religion. I envision that one day there'll be 8 billion of us with 8 billion different religions that we all just believe in our heart, from our own experiences and our own, you know, our own reverence for the divine. So this is not, you know, some kind of anti-God thing. This is just, you know, you gotta call out fraud when you see it, you know. And I think that the New Testament is obvious fraud. And the Old Testament is obvious plagiarism, with a healthy dose of misrepresentation and a serious amount of spiritualizing, putting God, like writing God into the story. The gods of the God of the Old Testament is a God with a small g, who's got so many human foibles that you couldn't possibly think of him as God if you isolated him. But he's translated as God. The name is Yahweh Elohim. It's not God. That's translated as God, but it needs to be not translated. Just leave it as Yahweh Elohim. Yahweh is a powerful character who is very far from being God, but closer to God than, because they have some technological advancement. And he is a member of the Elohim, which is a group of people or beings who are more advanced than we are and who rule us. And they are all kind of in competition with one another. And Yahweh is the one who is appointed to look after these Hebrews, a certain group of Hebrews. But to construe Yahweh Elohim as God is not paying attention to the text. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is to look very carefully at the text. And I know, the Old Testament is written mostly in Hebrew and the New Testament is written mostly in Greek. And those are two languages that I do not have, not much of anyway. And, so that's problematic already. But we're just trying to do the best we can. But then eventually we're going to get into a lot of harmonics, music, and music theory, sacred geometry, and how that matches up with music. And I think we're actually going to go over one of the I'm not remembering who the author was, but called this the greatest work of the 20th century, which is The Temple of Man by Schwaller de Lubitz. It's an expose on ancient Egyptian mathematics and geometry and what it really meant to them. And that book, just in the last 20 or 25 years, has been translated into English. But very, very, very few people know it. And it's going to push me as well, because my first time trying to read it, I only got up to about page 300 or so, 350, before I stalled out on it. I think it's got over 1,000 pages. I don't know if we're going to go through the whole thing, but we're going to try to reconstruct the mathematical system of the Egyptians, and we're going to get some help also from this guy Ben Iverson, who does this stuff called quantum arithmetic. And it's really, he breaks it down into quaternions. So we're really trying to find the links between number, sound, meaning, and I guess also geometry, like prepositions, up and down, left and right, back and forth. These all have they all have meaning, but we're not really kind of seeing language that way on this most fundamental level. So we're going to get into that, but it's probably going to be several months probably before we get to that. Unless I decide to do it before the Old Testament stuff. I don't know. Whichever one I'm ready to do more quickly. But for the short term, we're going to stick here with the New Testament, get it into The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and then eventually get into going directly from the book of Luke and decoding the book of Luke, which is kind of what Menescot's does, but we're kind of turning it around, because I feel like he did a masterful job of what he did, but it's not right down the alley for the Christians, because I just feel like they're Luke-centric, and so you bring, or Bible-centric, and so you bring it, you do it from the book of Luke, and you bring in all of the stuff that you need for it to decode it. So we'll be using a lot of the decodes from Menescot's, but there's many other decodes as well, including mythological, astronomical, physiological, and numerical or numerological, even geometrical, and pornographic, and mean-spirited mockery, and probably quite a few others. Also, with the help of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a cipher. So we'll get into all of that coming right up, but hopefully tomorrow, starting with The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and how the case for Christ is a better argument for the case for Caesar. All right, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.